The moment Renata Holbrook looked down at the bracelet on a 12-year-old boy's wrist and said, "How sweet, does he always wear things like that?" Nobody in Spinelli's diner made a sound. Not the waitress, not the couple by the window, not Roy Spinelli himself, who had come around from behind the counter and was standing with his hands at his sides and his jaw set and doing nothing. Because in Millhaven, Ohio, you did not cross Renata Holbrook. Not if you had a business that needed a zoning variance. Not if your livelihood touched anything the county commission controlled. Not if you'd watched, over the years, what happened to the people who tried. But at the table by the window, a man named Grant Selby had gone very still. And 2 booths away, a woman in a green cardigan had set down her coffee and reached quietly for her phone. Grant had not been planning on anything particular about that Friday. He'd worked the morning at the garage, brake job on a Tacoma, oil change for old Mr. Ferris, who drove in every 4 months and always stood where he could watch, as though Grant might do something differently without an audience. He'd closed up at noon, changed his shirt in the back bathroom, and driven to Millhaven Middle School to pick up his son. The reason they were at Spinelli's was Danny's science project. 3 weeks earlier, Danny had submitted a working model of a piston and crankshaft mechanism to the district's STEM fair. He'd built it mostly at Grant's garage workbench on Sunday afternoons, the 2 of them at the same table where Grant had once drawn engine diagrams for a living. Before he'd left all of that behind, Grant had explained the theory. Danny had made every design decision himself, often rejecting Grant's suggestions with the particular confidence of a 12-year-old who believed he was improving on established methodology. The judges had called the model unusually sophisticated for the grade level. Danny had placed 2nd in the district and 1st in the county, regionals in Columbus, in the spring. 2nd place, Danny had said in the car on the way home. He'd said it with the tone of someone genuinely processing a disappointment. Grant had told him that a project he'd designed himself, at 12, placing 2nd at district. That was something his mother would have put on the wall. Danny had been quiet for most of a mile. Then he'd asked if they could go to Spinelli's on Friday. Spinelli's on Friday was their thing. It had been since Danny was 7, the first full year after Joanna passed, when Grant had understood that keeping the shape of a week intact was the only way either of them stayed oriented. Spinelli's on Friday. The garage Saturday morning, Danny doing homework in the waiting area, while Grant worked. Whatever movie Danny picked on Sunday night, which Grant occasionally fell asleep during and was never permitted to forget. But that particular Friday, Danny had put on a button-down shirt and combed his hair, and on his left wrist he was wearing the bracelet. It was a plain thing, brown leather cord, 3 small wooden beads, the kind of object that cost nothing and meant everything. Joanna had made it the summer before the diagnosis. During a phase she'd described as wanting to make things with her hands, wanting Danny to have things she'd actually touched. She had pressed it into his palm 2 months before she died, and told him to wear it to every celebration from now on. Danny wore it to every celebration. Grant knew this. He also knew Danny had gone back and forth that morning about whether 2nd place at district counted, and had apparently landed on yes. They were halfway through their burgers when the door opened. Renata Holbrook walked into Spinelli's the way she walked into every room, as though the room had been expecting her and was slightly behind schedule. She was 51, trim, and precise, in a charcoal blazer that cost more than most of Millhaven's monthly rents. She had the particular kind of assurance that came from operating for a long time in spaces that rearranged themselves around her, and she moved without scanning the room because she did not feel the need to check whether a room was safe. 2 people followed her. A younger woman in a black blouse already typing on a tablet, and a man in a sport coat who positioned himself near the entrance and watched the room with the mild alertness of someone paid to be cautious in public spaces. Roy Spinelli came out from behind the counter. Roy was 63 years old, had run the diner with his wife for 28 years, and he greeted everyone the same unhurried way, whether they were a county official or a teenager buying a Coke. He said hello and told them the wait for a table was about 10 minutes. Renata looked past him toward the window. She looked at Grant's table. "I'll take that one," she said. Her voice was pleasant and certain, the tone of someone for whom pleasantness had always been sufficient. Roy said the table was occupied. Renata said she could see that. She was already walking toward it. Grant looked up when he heard the heels on the tile. He registered the blazer, the assistant, the way the man near the door shifted his weight, and something careful settled into place inside him. Not alarm, just attention. "Excuse me." Renata stopped beside the table and looked at Grant the way you looked at a lane you needed to merge into. "I need this table. The window light is necessary for my presentation, and my meeting starts in 12 minutes. "We haven't finished eating," Grant said. He said it without heat. Her eyes moved to the plates, then back to him. "How much longer?" "We just got our food." A pause. The smile did not change. "What is it you do?" Grant looked at her steadily. "I run a garage out on Route 9. Her gaze dropped briefly. To his hands, the grease lines under his nails that never came out entirely no matter how long he scrubbed. Then back up. "A garage," she said. Something in the way she said it didn't rise to contempt. It was quieter than that, the word filed away and found to be unremarkable. Then her eyes moved to Danny, more specifically to the bracelet. She tilted her head. Something shifted in her expression. A performance of warmth becoming something simply transactional. "Is that a friendship bracelet?" Danny looked up. He had his mother's eyes, dark, direct, and he used them on Renata now with the careful expression of a kid who had already made an accurate assessment. "It was my mom's," Danny said. Renata's expression moved by a fraction, the kind of movement that very controlled faces made when they were recalibrating. "That's sweet," she said. "The way you said fine when you meant something else entirely." She turned back to Grant. "I'll be direct with you. I have county officials meeting me here, and I cannot run a professional presentation squeezed into a booth in the back." She paused, and the pleasant expression was still there, but something underneath it wasn't pleasant at all. "I own 6 properties in this county. I have a long-standing relationship with the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board. I have a meeting today with individuals whose decisions affect every business on this road." She glanced at Becca, who had gone the color of old flour near the pie case. "If I have a difficult experience here, I need you to understand what that means for everyone in this room." She looked back at Grant. "One more time, please get up." Grant didn't move. What happened next was something the people in Spinelli's that afternoon would describe in slightly different ways, depending on who you asked. But the part everyone remembered the same way, the part nobody got wrong, was what happened with Danny. Grant felt it before he saw it, the way his son's posture changed, the stillness that was not calm, the particular quality of silence that came over Danny when something was hard and he was trying not to let it show, the same silence Grant had learned to read at 2 a.m. at the edge of a bed where nightmares had dropped him. Grant looked at his son. "Hey," he said. His voice came out the same way it always did in those moments, level, without urgency, like there was all the time in the world. "You want to show me those photos? The ones from the fair?" Danny looked at him. His jaw was tight. His hand was under the table. "Yeah," Danny said. "Okay." He pulled out his phone. Grant reached across the table and put his hand over Danny's for just a second, then moved it back. He looked up at Renata. "We're going to finish our lunch," he said. "You're welcome to wait at the counter, or Roy can set you up at the large table in the back. It seats 8. There's an outlet." The diner was so quiet that the refrigerator hum was audible. Renata stared at him. It lasted 4 full seconds. Then she did something no one in the room expected. She laughed, a short private sound, like someone remembering a joke that hadn't gotten better with age. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and walked toward the counter, making a call in a voice no one could make out. But her eyes came back to Grant's table twice during it. Roy Spinelli was already moving. He was a big man, unhurried, and he came to stand at the end of Grant's table with his arms folded and said to Renata, in the particular voice of a man who had run a place for 28 years and understood exactly what he was choosing, "The back table seats 8 and has better sight lines for a projector. I'll have Becca set it up." Renata looked at him the way she'd looked at Grant, as furniture that had inconveniently developed an opinion. "I'll remember this establishment," she said. Roy met her eyes. "I hope you do." She sat at the back table. Her assistant set up a laptop. 3 county officials arrived 14 minutes later and settled in without looking at the rest of the room. 2 booths away, a woman named Agnes Kellner had been watching all of it from behind a coffee cup she was no longer drinking from. Agnes Kellner was 67 years old, silver-haired and compact, with the specific quality of stillness that came from 31 years at the State Ethics Commission, 22 of them as a senior investigator. She had worked the Kellerman municipal case in 2011, the Prescott County Auditor case in 2015, a state procurement scheme in 2019 that had resulted in 5 convictions, and a law review article she'd read, and found approximately 70% accurate. She had dismantled systems built on the assumption that no one was watching for 3 decades, and she had gotten very good at recognizing when she was watching one. She had retired to Millhaven to be near her sister, and because she'd decided she'd earned the tomato soup at Spinelli's, which was the best in the county. She had recognized the mechanism the moment Renata assessed the county official's table instead of looking at the room. It was not the entitlement. Entitlement was everywhere. What she had spent 31 years training herself to read was the specific way people contracted when a particular name was in the room, not annoyance, not discomfort, but the practiced reflexive smallness of people who had learned through repetition that a certain name meant a certain category of consequence. She had watched Becca go still. She had watched Roy hesitate before he came out. She had watched Carlo appear in the kitchen doorway for no reason he'd be able to fully articulate. That was not one woman's personality. That was a pattern that had been built and maintained over time. Agnes set her cup down, folded her napkin, and walked quietly out the front door. She stood on the sidewalk for 3 minutes. 31 years had given her an ironclad rule. Never make a call when your pulse was still elevated. She watched a pickup truck ease around a pothole on the main road. She watched a kid on a bike cut through the hardware store parking lot. She breathed. Then she called a number she still had from memory. It rang twice. A woman answered, younger than Agnes expected, though 4 years had gone by. Kellner? A pause, something shifting in the background. I heard you retired. I am retired, Agnes said. I'm calling as a private citizen with a formal witness account. Are you recording? Give me 20 seconds. She gave her 30. The woman's name was Danielle Foss. She was the current deputy director of the State Ethics Bureau, and she had been Agnes's last significant hire before retirement. Agnes had trained her to listen to the pauses between what people said, to treat every detail as potentially structural until she had evidence otherwise, to be patient in ways that felt unnatural, because patience was not a virtue in this work. It was a methodology. Danielle had turned out to be a good student. Agnes talked for 9 minutes. She gave Holbrook's name, a physical description, the identities of the county officials she'd watched arrive, the specific quality of compliance she'd observed in the diner staff, the phone call Renata had made while keeping her eyes on the father and his son. She described what she had seen and what it indicated and what it did not indicate, with the precision of someone who understood the difference between observation and conclusion. When she finished, Danielle was quiet for a moment. We have a file, she said. 14 months. Zoning variances in 3 counties, awarded to Holbrook Group subsidiaries without the required public comment windows. Contract awards that don't match competitive bidding records. 2 former county employees who gave preliminary accounts and then stopped returning calls. Her voice shifted slightly. We've been looking for a current entry point. Something recent and documentable. Agnes looked through the diner window. At the back table where Renata Holbrook sat, beside 2 men from the county planning office, all 3 of them looking at something on a laptop screen. The father's name is Grant Selby, Agnes said. He runs a garage on Route 9. He was not doing anything. He was having lunch with his son, and he declined to move when asked. Understood. He is a private person. Agnes pulled her cardigan tighter. Whatever comes next, he is not part of the investigation. He was present at an observable indicator event. That is the limit of his relevance. Noted. Good. Get to work. She went back inside, finished her soup, left Roy a 20% tip, and walked home. She did not feel like a hero. She felt like a woman who had done the thing she was obligated to do. She had understood for a long time that those were not the same thing, and she did not confuse them. Grant did not know any of this. He helped Danny finish the last of the fries. He listened to Danny explain the specific mechanical reasoning behind why his crankshaft model had outplaced two 8th-grade entries, which Danny presented with the careful objectivity of a scientist who was also quietly and deeply satisfied with himself. They finished. Grant left enough on the table that Becca wouldn't have to do the math twice. When they stood to leave, the diner did something Grant hadn't anticipated. He'd been aware the room was paying attention. You couldn't have an exchange like that in a place the size of Spinelli's without everyone knowing, but he hadn't been watching the room. He'd been watching Danny. So he was not expecting it when the man at the counter started to clap. Not loud, not theatrical, just a man on a stool, both hands, steady. Then the couple by the window. Then the family in the corner booth, the father getting to his feet before his wife had fully registered it was happening. Then one by one, without organization, without anyone deciding, the rest of the room. Danny looked up at Grant with enormous eyes. Grant kept his face still. He nodded once at the room, small, unhurried. Then he put his hand between Danny's shoulder blades and walked his son out the door. Outside, Danny said, "Why were they clapping?" Grant thought about it honestly. "Because sometimes someone just needs to see another person not move," he said. "And when they see it, they remember they could too." Danny walked half a block thinking about that. "Is that what you were doing? Not moving?" Grant considered it. "I was finishing my burger," he said. Danny made a sound that was almost a laugh. They walked to the car. The investigation did not arrive in the form of a headline. It arrived in the form of a phone call to a former county land records coordinator named Donna Birch, who had relocated to Georgia after signing a separation agreement she had long regretted. Donna had been on the Bureau's list for 14 months and had not returned 3 prior calls. She saw a post on a regional community forum about the Spinelli's incident and felt something shift in her chest that she hadn't expected. Not anger, not vindication, but a specific and long-deferred sense that the moment had finally come. She called her attorney the next morning. The second call came from a retired county planning supervisor named Harold Bemis, who had watched the forum posts accumulate over the week following the diner incident and had told his wife, one evening over dinner, that he thought it was time. His wife had set down her fork and looked at him and said she'd been waiting 2 years for him to say that. Together, Donna's and Harold's accounts gave the Bureau what it had been missing: corroborated documentation of a pattern that had existed in the county's records and in 2 people's memories and nowhere that could be used. Added to Agnes Kellner's formal witness account, the file moved from a 14-month holding pattern to an active investigation in 11 days. Renata Holbrook did not resign. She retained additional counsel and issued a statement expressing full cooperation with the process. She stepped back from operational leadership at Holbrook Group pending the review. The statement used the word transparency 4 times and said as little as possible, which was what statements like that were designed to do. The county commissioner announced he would not seek re-election. A local news outlet covered it in 4 paragraphs. Most people in Millhaven learned about it from someone else. The formal findings from the Bureau were filed 6 months after the diner, documenting contract irregularities across 3 counties and sworn testimony from 6 witnesses. 3 county officials were named as subjects. The zoning board adopted a mandatory competitive bidding audit process for all contracts above a threshold that, according to the county's own records, had been systematically waived for nearly a decade. These were not dramatic changes. They were structural ones, the kind that showed up not in headlines, but in how ordinary requests moved through rooms, in whether a small business owner got a fair review, in whether a complaint from a planning coordinator got documented or buried, in whether a county official had to think twice before taking a call from a number he recognized. Grant found out about most of this the same way he found out about most things in Millhaven, from Roy, who had a nephew who followed county politics and kept Roy updated while Roy pretended not to care and clearly did. His sister called. 3 times, actually. Did he want to give an interview? He did not. Did he want to make a statement? He did not. Did he understand that what happened at Spinelli's had effectively handed investigators the entry point they'd been building toward for over a year? He had not handed anyone anything, he told her. He'd declined to give up a table. A woman had watched it and made a phone call. Those were two unrelated things that happened to occur in proximity. His sister told him that was the most aggravating thing he had ever said to her, and she'd known him his whole life. He told her she might be right. What stayed with Grant was not the investigation. It was Danny. 6 weeks after the diner, Danny's social studies teacher sent Grant an email. She said she didn't usually do that, but she thought he should know. In a class discussion about the concept of civic participation, Danny had used the Spinelli's lunch as an example. He had described it not as something dramatic, not as something heroic, but as an ordinary moment in which doing the expected thing, finishing a meal, staying in a seat, had turned out to matter in ways that moved outward beyond what either person at the table had understood at the time. The teacher wrote that he'd said it, without any apparent interest in being interesting. Grant sat with that for a while. Joanna had always said Danny processed things the way groundwater moved. Not visibly, not in any direction you could predict, and then all at once you'd find it somewhere it hadn't been. She'd said it the way she said most things about Danny, which was with the specific and slightly wondering attention of a person observing a phenomenon she was both responsible for and could not entirely explain. He thought about her on the drive to pick up Danny in October, the leaves already past peak, the sky the flat, clean gray of Ohio fall. He thought about her more gently than he used to. The grief had changed its character over 4 years, not smaller, but differently distributed. Less like a drop, more like a weight with worn grooves where it rested, shaped exactly to the place it sat. He'd stopped waiting for it to be over. It wasn't going to be over. It was part of the material he was made of now, and the question was only ever what he built with it. Danny came through the school doors mid-sentence, something about whether the textbook treatment of labor history in the 1890s was accurate. It was not, in Danny's assessment, and Danny had thoughts. Grant listened, asked questions, drove. At a red light, Danny looked over at him. Dad. Yeah. Are you glad about what happened? The thing with the woman at Spinelli's? Grant thought about it the way he'd learned to think, not for the answer that sounded right, but for the one that was. I'm glad you sat there and didn't ask to leave, he said. Danny was quiet for a while. I thought about it, he said finally. Asking to leave, he looked out the window. But you didn't look like you were doing anything except eating. That's mostly what I was doing. Danny nodded slowly, like that was the thing he'd been trying to figure out. It was. Agnes Kellner sent Roy Spinelli a handwritten note 2 months after the charges were filed. She thanked him for his steadiness that afternoon and said nothing more than that. Roy wrote back in the large, uneven handwriting of a man who had learned English as a second language and still, occasionally, switched letters in the middle of words. He said she was welcome at Spinelli's whenever she liked and that the tomato soup would be waiting. She smiled the note and kept it on her kitchen table, and sometimes looked at it when she was reading and needed to rest her eyes. She did not give interviews. A civic accountability organization invited her to speak at their annual forum, and she thought about it for 5 days and declined, because she had a finely tuned sense after 31 years of the difference between contributing something and simply being visible for the occasion. What she'd done at the diner had served its function. Anything additional would be theater, and she was too old for theater. Her Thursday lunch companions told her that was debatable. She told them it wasn't, and they left it there. The following May, on a Friday, Grant Selby walked into Spinelli's with Danny. It was the Friday after Danny had been notified that his crankshaft model had placed first at regionals. First, not second. First, in a field that included 2 high school juniors who'd entered early and a team from Columbus that had access to a full machine shop. Danny had received the call on a Wednesday and had said almost nothing for 2 days. Then, on Thursday night, he'd come to the doorway of Grant's room and said quietly, "Can we go to Spinelli's tomorrow?" The bracelet was on his wrist when they walked in. Roy was behind the counter when they came through the door. He looked at Danny's wrist and then at Grant and said nothing, just gestured toward the window. Their table. Becca brought their drinks before they'd fully settled. The diner was warm and a little loud the way it always was on Fridays. Someone's kid drawing on a placemat 2 tables over, the smell of coffee and pie in the oven, and the particular ease of a place that had been the same place for a long time. Danny picked up the menu, even though he already knew what he was getting. "Burger," he said. "You always get the burger." "I like to look," Danny said. "It's the principle." Grant drank his coffee while it was still hot. The afternoon light came through the window at its usual angle, flat and clear, the light of a mid-sized town on a Friday in late spring, unremarkable in the way things you loved were often unremarkable. Because the love wasn't in the extraordinary. It was in the showing up, again and again, to the same ordinary place. On Danny's wrist, the leather cord caught the light. Brown beads, simple thing, everything. Grant noticed it the way he always did, without saying anything. Some things didn't need to be said. They just needed to be carried, consistently, in the right direction. Outside, Millhaven moved through its Friday the way it always had. The hardware store closing up. A truck idling outside the post office. Kids cutting through the lot behind the diner on their way to wherever kids went on Friday afternoons in a town like this. Small life. The kind people sometimes offered apologies for having. Grant Selby had stopped accepting those apologies years ago. He refilled his coffee when Becca came by, and he listened to his son make the case, again, that the burger at Spinelli's was categorically the best in the county, and he agreed, as he always did, because it was true, and because some things were worth saying twice.